Good morning. Okay, I'm not a millennial, but I like to sort of straddle that line, so I'm going to take a picture of us. Excellent. Look for that on Facebook later. Thanks for coming out today. When you see a snowstorm, you immediately think that the universe is conspiring against you, so I appreciate you coming. Thank you to my board and staff, particularly Tanya Blanich. So you will discover, Tanya Blanich is our Director of Operations. There is absolutely no way this study could ever have been conducted had Tanya not been my Director of Operations, because I do not have the capacity to do this kind of work, and she loves Excel. So she is absolutely the reason we're here today. Thank you to Livewire, because they take such great care of us electronically, and thank you to the Chamber and Craig for letting me come and talk about this with you. I'm here to tell you today that I absolutely believe that in this room and in this community and in this region, I think I have the best job. And I think I have the best job because I think that the arts and culture are unequivocally the single most important thing that happens in a community. I absolutely believe that schools are important and low housing and jobs. They all matter. But lots of places have good schools, low, affordable housing, and jobs. What really sets a community apart is their art and culture. And so the fact that I get to spend all day, every day, eating, sleeping, breathing, and thinking about that brings me terrific joy and allows me to be in front of you. So for those of you who don't know the Arts Partnership, I could tell you about it or I could show you about it. So I hope that you will enjoy this pretty brief little film. We premiered this at the State of the Arts, which we have every year in June. That's one way you can get involved with the arts, is to attend that event. We can talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So what if I were to tell you that the FM Metro has a portion of a national industry that in 2014 generated $730 billion and was 4.2% of the gross domestic product of this country? Would you be interested in that? It seems likely that you would be as business people. So if you look at this, this is the only slide that we will talk about today that is all of the arts, for-profit and nonprofit arts. This is not what the study was about, but I was stunned to see what arts and culture are greater than in this country. I don't hear art and culture being talked about in this way on a national or really often even a local level. So I felt like it was important to include this because we take great pains to promote construction, transportation, mining, travel, tourism, and utilities, and we should. But arts and culture sit above all of that. So I think it's an interesting way to start. This study was done across the country, 341 study regions, including cities and larger areas in every single state. And Moorhead West Fargo participated for the first time in 10 years. It was time to do it again because we are a very different community than we were 10 years ago. I also want to say, before we get into this any further, that I am not a particularly driven by metrics person. I'm an artist. I'm driven by what the arts do for us as human beings, what they do for us as a community, as a culture, and how they continue to perpetuate who we are and the best of us. That being said, that rarely generates the kind of attention and investment necessary. So this is a heavily metrics talk, but keep in mind I'm not an economist, and it's not really what I think is the most important thing about the arts. I think it's an important piece, but not the most important piece. So we looked at spending in the Fargo-Moorhead West Fargo community. And when we sent this study off, we didn't really know what was going to come back. When you work in a field like the arts, you often have a general sense that things matter. If you've read anything that I write in the forum, you know that I pretty much routinely, on a monthly basis, say to people, the arts matter, they create economics, they do all these things. But we didn't really have numbers around it. Now we have numbers, $41.6 million in spending in 2015. That is not an insignificant number in a community of this size. Organizational spending was $17.5 million, which means what did they spend on salary, what did they spend on purchasing rights, on buying materials, and also that includes ticket prices. Audience spending of $24.1 million is simply what is spent above and beyond the price of a ticket. That goes into organizational spending. Audience spending is above that. So we will look at both of those areas. 46 arts and culture organizations filled this survey out. As I mentioned, it's a tedious, really time-consuming survey. Very, very small groups that are pure volunteer-driven, we're not always able to complete it. And some of our larger groups whose art budgets are merged into other budgets, like the Cheryl Nelson Lissette Performing Arts Series, which is a piece of MSUM's larger budget, we're unable to do the very, very detailed work. So 46 organizations filled it out. There were 97 identified organizations. 46 organizations reported 2.1 million audience members, twice the size of the population of North Dakota in 1 year. Imagine what our numbers would look like had the other 51 nonprofits also filled out this information. We probably would have taken the whole country, which would have been delightful. I'm a little competitive. I'm going to go through these numbers kind of quickly. We created out of this 1,533 full-time equivalent jobs. We generated $3.6 million in state and local government revenue. So those are the numbers generated by the organizations. But what about the audience? Because actually that's the much more interesting piece to me. The Arts Partnership collected 1,009 random audience surveys. Again, remember how important Tanya was. She practically did this all by herself. We went to 26 different events over the course of 14 months. I want to either inform you or remind you that I am a staff of 3, sometimes 3.5. And none of us were sitting around thinking, boy, I hope a big study comes along that helps us fill our time. So this was an enormous undertaking that both the staff and the board undertook. A little bit redundant. Americans for the Arts required 800 surveys, but they were willing to look at however many surveys we submitted, and they were only willing to take 50 from each organization. So we were incredibly excited. The first survey we did was at the Symphony. We collected 234 surveys and discovered that we only got to count 50 of them. So it was a lot of work, but we ended up with, I think, numbers that show that the work paid off. This is what attendees, both local and non-local, averaged per person per event. You can see that meals and snacks have a almost disproportionately high number. We are Midwesterners, after all. We do like to eat. But it seems to me that that is an area we need to pursue for the long term, is thinking about how do we perhaps find a tax that can go into restaurants. We simply have to find a way to create more revenue, and that might do it, particularly when we see the numbers of visitors who would help subsidize that. I'm not going to go through these other numbers. I do think it's interesting to note that whether you stayed more than one night and noted it on your survey or not, Americans for the Arts chose to count one night for everyone in an effort to not appear to be overinflating their numbers. 18% are non-local, 216,000. Local is 82%. That's not terribly surprising. Of the non-residents, 13.5% reported staying in a hotel. That's a big number. They only counted one night, as I said. Non-residents also spent 178% more than residents beyond the price of a ticket. Again, we are the kind of community that's attracting people from all over the region. You know it if you are in retail. Now we know it too. Event-related spending, again, remember this is excluding tickets. Local people spend $14.95 beyond the price of a ticket. Non-local people spend $41.62. So that is spending at restaurants, bars, shopping malls, small independent shops, gas stations, babysitters, coffee shops, all of the places that people go. I want to just talk you through one example related to this. We hold Chalk Fest every year at the Red River Zoo. We pay the zoo to have the zoo for the day, a $5,000 fee. On top of that, this is what helps explain this $14.95 and the $41.62. This year, the zoo made, oh, I cannot read these numbers. In the gift shop, $1,340. In concessions, $3,000. At their carousel, $1,100. They average 400 people on a Thursday in August at the zoo. Chalkfest at the zoo averages 3,800 people. So that's an example of where these numbers are coming from. Every arts leader in this room, and there are many of you, thank you for being here, can talk specifically about the people who come to their places and buy tickets and then go out for coffee, go into the gift shop, go out afterwards, all those kinds of things. We know that's happening, and now we've got numbers to prove it. 27.6% of residents reported that they would have traveled to a different community to attend a similar art event had it not been offered in the metro. This is important. We really can't afford to be losing 27.6% of people and more to other communities. Chelsea, my communications coordinator, is doing a piece on FM Ballet's Nutcracker, which will be in the Forum on Monday. People paid $180 to drive to Grand Forks to see the Moscow Ballet do the Nutcracker. They could spend, I don't know, $12 to $30, I think, to come and see our local professional production of the Nutcracker. Don't you want that money staying here? Don't you want them coming to our coffee shops, to our bars and restaurants, and people coming to see their grandchildren in these productions and staying in our hotels and our gas stations and all those other things? Part of why this study matters is because it's showing us that both residents and non-residents need what's happening in this community and need more of it. This is an interesting slide to me simply because I think when you are a community that is filled with volunteers, it says something about you as a community. So I'm not going to read these numbers to you, but I am, excuse me, going to thank you if you are a business who encourages your employees to volunteer in the nonprofit sector. And if you pay them or pay the nonprofit sector to do it, I applaud you all the more. So, we learned some other really interesting things from this study, and actually I feel like perhaps this is the most important part of the study. We figured out, based on the 1,009 random audience surveys, ages and median household incomes and education. And this is a great moment for those of you sitting in the room thinking, well, the arts are fine for the C-suites and the doctors and the professors, because that's who goes to the arts. I'm here to tell you that is not the only group that goes to the arts. We have a broad, fabulously wide spectrum, which I'm going to show you. I was really fascinated by the fact that almost 40-ish% of people who attend are 55 and under. We continue to hear that audiences are getting grayer and grayer and grayer. And as we all know, people are waiting longer and longer to get gray hair. So that's not actually true that audiences are getting grayer. We've got great turnout from this 55 and under, and particularly great in this almighty millennial 18 to 34-year-old age group. 14.4% of millennials are traveling in to see arts and culture. And again, remember, this is just the nonprofit sector. This does not count Gate City Bank's Broadway Theater. This does not count anything Jade Presents does or any other producers. This doesn't count bands who play in bars. This doesn't count galleries, individual artists. This is just the nonprofit sector. Education. This is another one that I think is incredibly important for people who dismiss the arts by saying, well, it's only for people with at least a 4-year degree. That's not true. Look at these numbers. 30% of our non-residents have 2 years of college or less. That tells me that as a community, we have the capacity to potentially attract them to move here. So I will use his name since he's not here. Brad Schlossman likes to say to me that people invest in 2 things, vision and crisis. I'm here to tell you, I think the arts serve both. I think we are in a crisis. Almost every chamber meeting I come to, people talk about the fact that today there are 6,000 openings. In 3 to 4 years, there'll be 30,000 openings. Many of those openings are in those sectors that will require people with 2-year degrees. We can no longer assume that those people only hunt and go to football, because now we know that they come to the arts. I'm pointing at this like it means something to you. You don't even know that I've got an image. Now we know they go to the arts. Annual household income. Again, if you look at $59,999 and less, more than 30% of our attendees who live here and are non-residents attend events. $60,000 is not an enormous household income anymore. So you can't say, well, it's only for wealthy people. It's not only for wealthy people, and I will tell you, when I lived in income-based housing with my son, I was at Plains Art Museum, I was at the Symphony, I was at Theater B, I was at Trollwood, I was at FMCT, and he was too. So we can't make those assumptions anymore. And then this I find really fascinating. We know that people who are engaged in the nonprofit sector, particularly arts and culture, tend to be civically engaged. 94.3% and 90.7%, we could hardly ask to live in a better community. I don't know who these people are because I feel like our voter numbers are always sort of embarrassingly low. But if this is true, which we don't have a reason to believe that it isn't, this says something really pretty spectacular about us as a community and should give us hope for the future going forward in terms of filling elected positions, which are not easy to do. So all of this is great, and I am super proud of the work that this community is doing and the arts and culture specifically. And I think that it's really imperative that you understand that we are in a reciprocal relationship with the business community. The arts and culture sector is an asset for you. Where we provide vision, if the crisis is hiring, the vision is that when we're stronger, you're stronger. Your job openings can be filled when people can say, my wife doesn't want to move here because she doesn't think there's anything to do. Other sectors have done a fabulous job of promoting their value in this community. I feel like we've tried, and now we can show it. So it's really, the vision is that when you work with us and we work with you, we all do better. You fill your jobs and you retain your jobs. I know how expensive it is to hire someone, train them, and then lose them in a year and a half to a variety of other communities. We have to do a better job of attracting. We have to do a better job of keeping. And I think the arts and culture are a really significant way to do that, and other people do too. The last thing that I want to talk to you about, and then I'll invite my panel up, is how are we doing compared to other communities in the region? So we did not look at other Minnesota cities because Minnesota, I like to call it the land of milk and honey for arts and culture. When you sit 4 blocks from Minnesota and you see legacy funding and you don't have access to it, I do feel a little bit like Moses. But, you know, we didn't look at them because it's like comparing apples to elephants. But we did look at other communities in the region to see where do we sit. And here's where we sit. At the bottom. $235 per capita for 194,000 people. I have been very fortunate to spend time in a variety of these communities. We've gone on a bunch of arts and economics tours in the last couple of years, meeting with economic chamber business leaders and arts leaders, talking specifically about how they're doing it in their communities. And the one that I really want to look at is Des Moines. Who's been to Des Moines? Who wants to move to Des Moines? I want to move to Des Moines. I'm not, but I want to. Here's what I can tell you. Des Moines is the fastest growing city in the region. That was just claimed this year. Their growth was 2% in 2016. Do you know who's second? That would be Fargo at 1.9%. I think we absolutely can and should be Des Moines and better. And I think it's well within our grasp, but it is not within our grasp if we don't better support the arts and culture. Here's what I will tell you. When you sit down with chamber leaders, economic leaders, developers, and business people in Des Moines, Iowa, and you say to them, talk to me about the success of your city. You know what they say? Person to person to person to person? Art and culture. I could not have scripted better conversations than I had in Des Moines this summer. In the early 1990s, Des Moines was decaying, much like Fargo was before we revived it. And 3 businessmen sat down and said, we don't want to lose to the rest of the country, much less the Midwest. What should we do? And you know what they did? And this is my personal challenge of personal opinion, I guess. They went all in. They decided they would build a performing arts center, they would build a convention center, they would revive their downtown, and they would create a gateway that welcomed people from the airport into their community. And they wouldn't piecemeal it, and they wouldn't be mamby-pamby about it. They would go for or none, and they did it. And it changed the entire scope and culture of that community. Now they can barely keep up with their growth, and they can barely figure out how to deal with the bounty of art and culture. You know what they don't have? They don't have 3 4-year institutions. They don't have a Microsoft. They don't have a Sanford equivalent. They don't have, I don't know, those are enough. They don't have any of that, and they're still growing faster than we are. And really the difference is art and culture, because they also don't have mountains, they don't have oceans, their weather is better, but it's not great. They have a lot of the challenges we have and almost none of the assets we have. So there is only one answer, really, and it's art and culture. So my challenge to you before I bring up my panel is to do a couple of things. 1, please sign up for the Arts Partnership newsletter so that you know what's going on. 2, please engage with me personally. If you're trying to attract someone to your business and he or she says to you, I'm sorry, where? I can't move here. My children are in a youth symphony. My husband does this. My wife does that. You know what? I can do this talk much, much, much faster and much more interestingly for people who are in the arts. I'll happily come and talk. It serves my organization when you are more successful. I'll happily come and meet with anybody who's afraid to move to Fargo, North Dakota, Moorhead, Minnesota, or West Fargo, North Dakota because they think there's nothing to do besides hunt. I've never hunted in my life and I've lived here a long time, so there's plenty to do. Thank you for listening. I would love to call my panel forward.